Shivani gives a brilliant lecture that is very well organized ahead. I tend to do my slides, I think through my materials, I have outlines and lesson planning, and then I speak like this with you. And that's the style that I use with my own students at Bates College, and it is what I plan to do today. Now, I'm under some limitation because we're being filmed, and so I will need to stay somewhat to the front, but I tend to move a lot in between and around. When I'm in my classrooms at Bates, I set up either small tables or we work our tables in a horseshoe like this. Again, remember that everything we do in education reflects a philosophy, whether we know that it does or whether we are not aware of that. And so philosophically, when we set our chairs up or the way that we use even technology is reflecting something we believe about education. So what I hope is that you understand and appreciate the value of multiple forms of teaching, of pedagogy, because we don't just pick one. There are times that some things work better than others. There are times that we just want to have that variety. So again, I speak from myself with the work that I have. So let's go ahead and jump in. Very briefly, let me tell you very bit about myself, which is this, that I grew up being passionate about education. I come from a line of educators. And I always believed that we could make the world better through education. So I studied education. I also studied French and English, meaning literature arts kind of English, in college. And I earned 2 teaching licensures. One was in English language arts and the other was in French. But then I did something totally random. I went to an inner city school, which is a very poor city environment in the US, outside of New York City, and I taught first grade for 2 years. And I didn't know anything about first grade, and I didn't know anything about the inner city. I am from a very rural place in Maine, which I'll show you in a minute. So it was a vastly different experience for me, and it started forming that philosophy for me right away on day one, because I saw a classroom full of little first graders who needed everything we just heard Shivani ma'am talking about. They needed play, they needed joy, they needed to learn their basic facts, they needed to learn how to read, they needed each other, they needed songs, they needed art. And so we just did. We played and played and learned and learned. And after that experience, I then moved back to Maine, which is where I had come from, and I taught for 2 years at a school system that was really for kids, for young people. It was a middle school and a high school for young people who were maybe at risk of dropping out of school or who didn't have a family that was a strong enough unit to help take care of them. So I did that for 2 years. And then I ended up working with kids that we call at-risk youth. And I was explaining to some of you young folks over here the other day, but at-risk youth are ones who are really in danger of dropping out of school, or they have dropped out and have come back to school. And so the at-risk youth also really formed my philosophy, because what I realized is that every single one of these people in front of me or working with me was precious. They were precious people who had largely given up on their education. And when I say largely given up, I'm telling you that they directly said things like, "Why are you bothering with me?" Or "I'm not worth anything," or "I'm not even going to have a future," or "No one believes in me." And these were statements that they were saying directly. And they said, "You could do anything. Why would you be here?" And I'd say, "I choose to be here with you. I choose to be here with you, educating you." And again, we did all sorts of things that were loaded with engagement and material, but also we cared about the human spirit and the human self. And so that was a lot of what formed my philosophy about, I'm not teaching English, I'm teaching people. I'm not teaching French, I'm teaching human beings. And no matter what the discipline, we are teaching human beings. And I don't care if they're 5 years old, or 15 years old, or 20 years old, or 40 years old. We're teaching human beings. So that is always at the base of my philosophy. Now, do I do it perfectly? Absolutely not. But if I know my philosophy and I hold it in an open hand, I can think about it and look at it. Will I always get it right? I will not always get it right. Will I sometimes lose people off my edges? Yes, I will. But if I try, I can do better than if I didn't try. Okay, so it's not perfect. I will never claim that. I have plenty of people who I miss, but I also know that by trying, I hit more than I miss, okay? So all of what you learned this morning blends very nicely with kind of those thoughts about what do we do, how do we engage in classrooms in front of us. I realized, and I just built this slide because it dawned on me that I had not really I had not built in a place to talk about the basic structure of American education. Let me also just say one other thing. I mentioned on day one that I have children from India. I have 5 children. I have 2 biological and 3 that are from India, one of whom is from Pune. Those children have also changed the way I think about children and the way I think about education. Every experience that I have is both personal and professional. And I believe in bringing that holistic self to the work that I do in education. It would be artificial not to. I am partly who I am today because of those other personal connections. My kids are now all between the ages of 24 and 31, so they've grown up. They're now adulting officially. But they are all very, very different people, and they've all taught me different things. I have a son on the autism spectrum. I have a child who was born male and identifies as non-binary, and they've taught me a lot about how I use my vocabulary and how do we understand what that means to be gender fluid in a world that doesn't always accept that. I have a child who's legally blind. I have one that's had, mental health kinds of concerns. I have a son from India who came to me at age 12, not 12 months, 12 years. So he had lived 12 years of his life in an orphanage setting and was suddenly popped into a family with a whole bunch of siblings. He was actually our last kid, and he's also my oldest. So it gets very interesting when you look, and he was an English language learner, meaning that we had to start basically from scratch with him learning English while he was trying to survive. All of these experiences make me who I am as an educator, and I don't ever for a minute forget about those. Sitting on my shoulders is my grandmother who was an educator, my mother who was an educator, my aunt who's an educator, my brother who's an educator. My son on the autism spectrum is now an educator. And so that's the value of it. I'm passionate and believe in it very deeply. Where I come from is Maine. It's the most northeastern state in the United States. Boston is in this area. New York is down here. And so you can see that I'm completely up here. This is Canada up here, and this is the Atlantic Ocean here. So I am close to the ocean, close to Canada, and it's very rural. And it's also a very poor state. We tend to think of, I know that a perception of the United States is that people are living high on the hog and, having all these experiences and so on. That is not true. There are many, many pockets of poverty, and Maine is one of the pockets. Maine is one of the poorest states in the country. So we have a lot of rural areas. From about this mid-level on, it's almost entirely just forest. My son teaches up in an area that's quite remote as well. So I have grown up in Maine. I come in and out. I always find myself coming back to Maine. I do love Maine, but it was snowing when I left. So there are things that get winter gets a little long in Maine, but our summers are beautiful. So that just gives you a little bit to place who I am and where I am. Again, if you think about this on a different level, what we know is that we build relationships, and we can't build relationship if we don't get to know each other. You can't necessarily understand my perspective on things if you don't have some core understanding of who I am, and the reciprocal is also true. I am going to have a hard time being able to adjust for you if I don't know who you are. So I work to try to get to know my students, and I wish I had more time to do that with you all. I did not have previously said in the slide the structure of U.S. schooling, and it did occur to me that that's sort of a fundamental, like, what are you talking about when you talk about grades? When I talk about grade 1, you all tend to say class or level. In the U.S., we say grades. So I've put this up here. Preschool and pre-K are not mandatory. They are optional. They are sometimes paid for. Pre-K tends to be provided through funding, whereas preschool is more of something that a parent might pay for. It depends. If you're within certain poverty levels, you can get preschool paid for, but it's not mandatory. But starting in grades, typically in grade kindergarten, and I, for some reason, left kindergarten out there, but I would put that with the kindergarten through 5, is our elementary school structure. Again, you might call it primary. You could call it, like there can be early, lower primary, and upper primary, but we just say elementary school. Typically in the US, we say elementary, and we mean kindergarten through grade 5. Sometimes it's kindergarten through grade 6. It depends on local, where I'm from in Maine, the local schools are kindergarten through 6, actually. And then you move into middle school, which is typically a different school. It almost always is a different school. And it is typically grades either 6, 7, 8, or it is grades 7, 8. Again, where I'm from in Maine, it's 7, 8. So there are 2 years of that middle school, and we call it middle school. It used to be called junior high school. It's now called middle school because the word middle school implies a philosophy that's different from junior high school. Junior high school means you're just little high schoolers. Middle school means you're in a middle stage where you're going through some things as a kid and you're trying to grow up. So the philosophy changes even based on what we call a school, okay? And then we have high school, which you might call secondary, and that's grades 9 through 12. And we don't split that out, and there's no choosing a track in 10th grade. It's just 9 through 12. You do your programming for high school and grades in those 12. There is a vocational track sometimes that is not, it's not a unique track. It's just some courses that some kids take in high school. So you can take a couple of years of some kind of a vocational auto mechanics or child care is one, or plumbing, or a lot of them are hands-on trades, and they are for all genders and all people. There's just a variety. Cooking is one of them, and so on. But a lot of kids do that just sort of as an extra pickup kind of a thing. Sometimes there are also programs for things like healthcare and those kinds of things. And then if you choose to go on to college, you might choose a vocational school, which is typically 2 years, or a community college, which is 2 years, and you get what's called an associate's degree. Many people, when they choose colleges, or university, will choose a BA, a bachelor's degree, and that's 4 years. And then move on to a master's, which is anywhere from 1 to 3 years. Master's for teaching tends to be about a year, but there are programs that can be more. And a PhD is anywhere from 3 upward, depending on when people complete their dissertation work. So 3 to 7 is pretty typical. Mine was completed in about 4.5. It just depends on how long it takes you to get through that work. Okay, that gives you the basic structure, just so you all have some understanding. Let's see, how do I, okay, great. Do I point it here? Where do I? Okay, so let's get into some of the history of education. And again, remember that the mode of teaching that we're doing right now is kind of a lecture based, but I do want to make sure you all are engaged fully. I do have activities that will review this, and I will try to model for you some of what I do in my classrooms at my college, at Bates College, and what I've also done throughout my career with any group of students in front of me, including you. In fact, even saying students in front of me means something, doesn't it? Because I'm not sitting in that circle with you, and so you are now in front of me. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly start talking about some of the historical pieces. You don't need to memorize all of these dates and names. I don't really worry about that. What I worry about is just that you conceptually have some understanding. The United States is a new country, relatively speaking, and in some ways it was a chance to start fresh with how we set up education systems. And so there were some famous educationists, philosophers, and theorists who, but again, we don't start from scratch. So there were models around the world that were already in existence for education that could be borrowed from. In the 1600s, which was before, it was while we were still colonies, and we were just beginning to be a small, we weren't a country yet. We were under British colonial rule, was that we had some schools that were established, but they were highly religious in nature. It was really to educate you to be religious, to learn some Bible verses, to learn some morals. So anything that was school related wasn't really about a school system like we know it today. But then in 1776 was the American Revolution, and in some ways it was the chance to kind of redefine what do we think about education. And education started to move to the forefront as basically as necessary for democracy. And so by the 1800s, we had people saying, you cannot establish and sustain a democracy without education. Again, think philosophically of what that means, that to be part of a democracy, to be part of a voting populace, to have civic understandings, you must have an education. You need to know what it is that you are embedded in and how to maintain that. So because of that, then obviously there was a push towards really creating school systems. Now, during the 1800s and well into the 1900s, the schools that were established were segregated, and they were segregated by race. Now, I don't have time today to build an entire course for you about the history of race in America, but it is fraught. It is fraught with challenge. It is fraught with discrimination. It is fraught with bias. The United States as a whole was built on the backs of slaves. Tobacco, cotton, there were industries that were enormous plantations. But what ended up happening was that there was a lack of education provided for those children. And so there were separate schools that were sometimes set up that, as you can well imagine, had very different kinds of resources. Very different kinds of resources. Different teachers who may or may not have had the education that other schools had, in particular white schools, okay? So highly segregated systems, which led to vast systems of inequality. All right, so then in the 1920s to 30s was a very well-known person, Horace Mann. And Horace Mann, here's a picture of the stately man named Mann. And he was sort of one of the fathers of American education who said, everybody needs an education. You simply cannot have a country that believes in freedom, that believes in democracy, if you don't have education for all. So he advocated for public school reforms, and what he said was that it needs to be free for everyone. And so he was really a forefront runner on that. And then the public school system, the free public school systems began to expand a little bit, and we really had a pretty strong set of systems. However, still segregated schools. So you still had segregated systems for black children and white children. And of course, there's more than just black and white. And so then there's the question of, you know, where do other kids fit into this scheme? You've heard of John Dewey already. John Dewey was a proponent of progressive education. And again, if you pick up on Shivani Ma'am's kind of information that she's provided over the last couple of days, you'll see connections, very strong connections, because progressive education is really about being, John Dewey believed that we were members of a society and also growing ourselves. And progressive education was really about learner-centered, student-centered work. It was really about saying, who are the people in front of us? So if you compare somebody like Tagore or somebody who's believing, you know, John Dewey, they were very much of a like mind. And so that's kind of some of the beginnings. And here we have a picture of a child in a segregated school, probably from the late 1800s to early 1900s. I'm not sure of the date on that one. So we're going to keep going with some historical facts, and I'm not trying to load you in. I am not a historian. But again, we have to know where we came from, don't we? So when we think about where do we go next? So we have a civil war in the mid-1800s. That says 1865 to 1865. Oh, okay, well, it was longer than that. But anyway, the Civil War was the time when, as it implies, there was war within the United States, largely a North and South issue. Again, I don't have time to get into all of that. But at the core of the Civil War was the issue of slavery, because the South had built large plantations with the use of slaves. And that history is you really need to take a class someday if you want to know more about that. It's very poignant and it's very hard history. But in the North, people were saying, and especially in the North, you had more cities, you had more urban areas, you had more factories, you had opportunities for work. And so a lot of people were coming from the South to the North, and slaves had freedom in the North, so they were freed. And so we had a civil war which really divided out the country. The North won, but winning a war does not necessarily mean that all of a sudden everybody's holding on to your philosophy, right? And so you don't just suddenly lose a war and go, I agree with you. I think you were right, right? If you lose a game, you don't go, yeah, you guys are right. I guess I did lose, right? So there were continuing challenges that were severe because it wasn't quite so easy to just say, well, we lost, let's just go ahead and do what the North tells us to do. So we ended up continuing to think about education, and the curriculum starts to shift a little bit around, again, the late 1800s to early 1900s to be more practical. Like initially it was things like Greek and Latin. It's like, that's not gonna help me find a job. You know, when you all have probably asked, any of us in this room have probably asked, why do I need this? Right, what is this for? So there was a movement to say, well, we do actually need some practical education. We need to survive in a literate world. And not just survive, but thrive in a literate world. So we start to move along, we're kind of moving along. And then in the mid-1950s was the very famous case, Brown versus the Board of Education. You may have heard of this if you've studied education at all, or if you know anything about some of the key legal issues in the US. But if you ask most Americans, well, I can't say that nowadays, I have no idea. But I will tell you, if you ask my students, they will tell you they know what Brown v. Board of Education is. And it's sometimes abbreviated as Brown v. Board. It's just an easier way to say it. This was the key decision that desegregated school systems. And the fundamental principle was that separate is never equal. Separate is not equal. You cannot simply say there's a black school and a white school and they are equal. They are not. They are fundamentally unequal because the resources that go into those schools are radically different. And the ways in which those kids have opportunities and whatever the next steps are, and whether they have computers nowadays, not in the 1800s or 1900s, is really radically different. So, so this was a very important thing. Now again, let's suppose, again, this is where I would tend to walk around a little bit more. I've got to stay within the camera. But let's suppose that I say to you, you need to desegregate your school now, and the law says you must. So now you say to me, well, okay, I guess I have to follow the law. But then you read a little bit of the fine print. And the fine print says, with all deliberate speed. Oh. Now I say to you, you're going to desegregate your school, right? And you say yes. But what are you going to now do? You don't want to segregate you don't want to desegregate. You don't want to have the black kids coming into your white school. So what could you tell me? Anybody, what could you say? Say that again. Do it very slowly so it never takes place. Bingo. Do we still have segregated schools today? We do. Now, by law, you're not allowed to. In practice, there are many ways to segregate a school. All I need to do is draw my city lines on a map a certain way. All I need to do is make sure that this neighborhood school is for just this black community, right? There are many ways that I can keep it going. So when I say with all deliberate speed, you can simply say back to me, okay, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll get to it the next day. Maybe I never get to it. So there was a very slow, and there was a lot of resistance. Again, when you lose, you don't just go, okay, I suddenly see it your way. Changing minds is a lot harder than changing a law, right? We changed the law, but we didn't change minds. So this was a slow, hard process that continues to be alive and well even today, okay? Now we know that segregation is illegal. And we know that separate is not equal. But we also can create, like I said, those district lines We can also say, well, we don't have a choice. We can also say, well, there was never a date on this. And so now you start to see things like Ruby Bridges in 1960, who was the very first elementary child, black child, to go into a white school. And what I want to show you is all of these men around her are the National Guard, and she needed adult protection for a tiny little 5-year-old child to go into a school. This is a stunning and very famous picture. It shows just a child, a little girl, who's just trying to go to school. And she needs protection around her of a bunch of men, and she had to walk through a gauntlet of people that were yelling at her and angry with her and spitting on her. And so again, and I don't mean to, we've made progress, we're working on it, okay? But I want you to understand that, and there were of course people who cared deeply about Ruby and made sure that she got what she needed as well. So I don't want to make it look that everybody, there were plenty of people who were supporting getting Ruby into that school, okay? But she kind of symbolically represented that motion towards that integration, because as we can see, if the case was 1954 and she's in 1960, you can see what I mean about, well, we'll do it when we feel like it, right? You can see that right there on those dates. Okay. All right, now, the next important thing was really this. In 1965, we had ESEA, which is the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. That was really the federal government now saying, we have got to have a free education for all officially, and we're going to provide federal funds for it, and we're going to make sure that kids get educated in the way they need to get educated. So that was great, and it was actually providing federal money, in particular for low-income schools, and it was part of the war on poverty. So the government was saying, we have a lot of poor kids, they sometimes don't have the funding they need to get to school, we'll start to do that. And then things like school lunch programs started to come into being, because we know that food helps kids be in school, but also get to school in the first place for that food, and also helps them learn. And so there were federal funds set up. Now, does that solve all the problems for everybody? No, it does not. We still have, even within our schools, there's still, even at this point, we still have kids that are not necessarily getting equal education opportunities. In large part, we're talking about girls, and we're talking about the disabled. And of course, we're still talking race. That's an ever ongoing conversation, but we at least are starting to target race in a very direct way. So now in 1972, it's time to start thinking about gender. That what we realize is that there is a lot of discrimination on the basis of sex. And by that, I'm talking, and in 1972, we were still talking boys and girls. We were still talking male and female. We weren't talking about the larger issues of gender. We were literally talking about whether boys and girls are getting equal education. We're talking about whether girls have access to the math and science classes. We're talking about whether girls are, when I grew up, which was in the 70s, girls took home economics, meaning we learned how to sew and we learned how to cook. And boys took auto mechanics and woodworking and electricity and those kinds of things. And it was very clearly the girls do this and the boys do that. That has since changed, and I check in with my students regularly, and even my own kids growing up, where schools either now mandate that all genders take everything, or that they're just open to whoever wants to take whatever it is. But we still, again, we saw there's discrimination in sports, which is another whole topic of another day. But the point is that in 1972, something called Title IX, when you see this word title, it just means section. It's just a section of a law. I don't know why we call it a title. It's just think of it as section. Think of it as, in India, you all use the word scheme sometimes, right? So think of it as just a term that means section. So this Section 9 was based in a law that prohibited that discrimination. But we still have a whole bunch of kids that are not getting educated. And these are kids that have disabilities that are severe enough to keep them out of the mainstream classes. Now, I teach a course in disability at my college, and I also teach the law around this in a master's program. So I know this law like the back of my hand. I could recite it in my sleep. And what I will tell you is this: disability is a huge umbrella. A huge umbrella. All of us in some ways have disabilities, right? My eyes are quite bad. I am a little bit disabled in my eyes, okay? But I'm not under the category of being visually impaired according to what the law might protect in this way. Now, if I weren't wearing my glasses, I might actually be in that category, but I have something that can help me to see, right? Okay, so disability is enormous, right? You might break a leg, you're kind of disabled because you're not able to get around the same way. But we have certain categories then of disability, but even those categories are very vast. You have everything from blindness and deafness to autism, to dyslexia, which is very manageable in classrooms, to intellectual disability, to cerebral palsy. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of categories, and they're all very different categories. Somebody who's blind needs something different from somebody who's deaf, needs something different from somebody who's autistic, okay? So this law came into being in 1975, and it was originally called the Education for All Handicapped Children. We now call it IDEA, which is Individuals with Disability Education Act. So I'm just going to say that again because I don't have it written out. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That act is critically important and very strong. Again, I teach this inside and out, and I teach an entire course, which you all call a paper or a program, on this law alone. And that law said, wait a minute, we said everyone gets a right to an education. So you can't tell me that everyone does not include this child or does not include any child out there. Yeah, but hold on, wait. My school doesn't have a ramp, I'm sorry. They can only get to my school if we have a ramp. No, you get a ramp and you get it soon. You get it immediately. That's not an excuse. You can't say you don't have a ramp. Yeah, but this person's blind and they really need brailing. Then get brailing and get it now. This law is tight. Is it perfect? It is not even close to being perfect. Are there a lot of issues that come up? Are there lawsuits around it? Yes, but it is a good, strong law. And the law says, well, wait, hold on. I'm teaching 5th grade, and that child is operating at a 6-year-old level. So obviously they shouldn't probably be in school. No, that's wrong. They can still be in school. And maybe they don't go into your 5th grade class, but maybe we make a different arrangement within that school. Now, when I talk about public schools, I'm talking government schools, and I want to make that clear as well, because one of the differences between India and the US is that you all have a category called government schools, and then you also have a category called public schools. And they are slightly different based on, well, a lot of factors you all know better than I do, okay? In the US, we call them public schools, and those are our government schools. So anytime I say public school, I'm not thinking of the Indian public school, I'm thinking of government schools, okay? In the US, government schools are actually quite strong. They have very strong licensure requirements. All teachers must take a course on this law, and that's the course I teach. All students that want to, all teachers in the US must take an entire paper on this law, because there is no excuse. You can't say, I'm sorry, I don't know what to do with that in my classroom. I'd be fine in my class if I just didn't have that kid sitting there, right? We're going to talk more about this as the week goes on. But you're not allowed to do, you may believe it, you may go home and believe it. I've had talks with teachers before that say, yeah, but I said, you can go home and say that all you want to, but here in the school, as a teacher, you are not allowed to say that. You say, yes, please, let's get these kids in, and let's figure it out. So my son on the autism spectrum, many examples of teachers say, well, he won't make eye contact during presentations. Right, because he's autistic. So what we do instead is we don't make that work against him. You're not allowed to give somebody, you're not allowed to mark somebody down negatively due to a disability. So my son on the autism spectrum, if he can't make eye contact with a presentation, he doesn't get marked down or fail that presentation because of it, okay? Just like you wouldn't say somebody who has a broken leg, well, they just failed, they can't make the race today. You work with that person and find a different way. You figure it out. We're going to talk a lot more this week about this. I'm just giving you a little bit of a little drop in the bucket there, okay? All right. So now I would like you all to do what I call a think, pair, share. And again, I'm modeling for you some ideas. So think, pair, share goes like this. First, you think. And so on your own papers or in your own heads if you want to, but I always tell students try to jot down, if you have paper in front of you, 2 or 3 thoughts on what are the, give a couple of thoughts in your head about 2 benefits to having inclusive practices that are truly inclusive for everybody. Race, gender, I'm going to throw LGBTQ in there, but our laws are not yet very strong on that. And disability. What are 2 advantages and what are 2 disadvantages? Write that down quietly. You're just in think mode. Actually, just come up with 1. So for the sake of time, 1 advantage to full inclusion practices and 1 disadvantage to full inclusion practices. Okay, that's the think part, and if you didn't finish, it's okay. If you did not finish, it's okay. That's the think part. I'm not collecting these, it's just think. Now we have think, pair, share. So now you turn to a group around you, 2 or 3, and remember what I said previously, if somebody is off a side, you make sure they get included. You say, hey, turn around and join us. Okay, so you make sure that everybody's always included, and as a teacher, if I need to help with that, that's something a teacher can do. And share with each other. Just share a couple of thoughts. We won't have time to do a lot of this today. So share in your small group, share out your thoughts. Go ahead right now. Okay, now let's do the think, pair, share. So we paired, we did think, we did pairing, and we're going to share out this way a little bit. Now again, for the sake of time, I do think, pair, share all the time in my Bates classes. Almost every class I do something like what we just did. Sometimes I do a turn and talk, which is a variation, which is skipping that first think part of everybody doing it by themselves. It's just turning and sharing out. But now we do the share part. Now we can't all have everybody share. So there are a lot of ways you can do this in a classroom. You can have them share with larger, like say 2 groups combined. You can ask somebody from this side of the room and somebody from this side of the room. There are a lot of ways that you can arrange this to meet your time differentials depending. So let's say that somebody from that back row, can you share out 1 thought, either a pro or a con? Nice and loud so the cameras pick it up. Oh, a mic, there we go. Yes.
that you are in the class, and we could learn from the experiences and the resilience, as you mentioned earlier.
Very nice. Resilience and empathy. Remember that I'm not teaching education, I'm teaching people, right? I'm not teaching English, I'm not teaching science, I'm teaching people, okay? This is true, and it's borne out by research, that what we know with inclusive classrooms is it does, in fact, and research bears, this isn't just Anita talking, empathy increases and resilience increases, and it benefits everyone. And studies bear that out time and time again. How about a disadvantage from over in this corner over here? Oh, I'm sorry, yes, the mic needs to go. Thank you. You have to keep reminding me.
The goal of education depends. So, for example, if I were thinking from a purely capitalistic point of view, then it would not be fun for me to think of everybody, and because it's time consuming and it diminishes my resources I could otherwise be built towards potentially.
Very nice. I don't know if people heard that, but she tied in both marketization in a way, right, of education and the time that it might take. So when we deal with a market economy, when we're looking at competitiveness within, if we're only looking at test scores to get ourselves somewhere, now we've got a problem because we have a classroom of people that may, in fact, if we are products, right, if we're making these screens, the ones that have flaws in them that I can see, that are visual flaws, I just get rid of. They're not in my market, right? But children are not screens. If I'm making these tables and one of them breaks or one of them doesn't have a leg that works very well, we put it over in the corner. We don't worry about it. But we can't do that with children, okay? Or we can do it with children. But should we? And that has everything to do with our philosophy. Thank you, that was very well said. So we can keep going. I'm going to keep moving us forward. If we have time later today, we'll do a little bit more exploration. But what I wanted to show you partly was I'm modeling. Remember this meta level? We're also always learning about what we're doing we're thinking about what we're doing. So this activity works well. What if somebody comes into a class and they're completely unprepared? Are they going to be safe and okay with that activity? Maybe not, but maybe yes. So here's the thing about this. What I like about Think, Pair, Share, somebody may be sitting there lost. But if they're completely lost, am I singling them out? I am not. One of the things they can do is rely on a peer. Now, do we all want to have that person always depending on a peer? No, of course not. But the more we do these activities, the more students come in going, oh, we might be doing this, or oh, I guess, well, maybe I do have something to share. And eventually, over time, students who may be more disengaged become engaged. What if you were kind of zoning off and sleeping in the background? Can you kind of get away with doing that for very long with Think, Pair, Share? You can't. Because now what about the teacher? I would typically come around, I'd check in, I'd make sure people are talking to each other, right? Okay, what I'm trying to say is that educationally, that kind of the more we engage, the more we do, the more we're going to connect the learning, okay? So we can do that in classrooms pretty easily. That didn't take any extra effort to set. That took time, but it didn't take a lot of effort. Okay, I have a video that I think I'm going to come back to because I want to keep going with this. We'll see if we have time. And if not, we have some play time in our later session. Okay. So what I'm going to say is this, that in 1983, a report came out that made everybody gasp. A nation at risk. That's terrible. And it really said American education is oh, I'm touching my mic. Did I mess it up? Okay. All right, sorry about that. Don't clutch the pearls. Okay. Which, you know that expression, clutch your pearls. It's like, oh no. Okay, a nation at risk told us that America was in big trouble and the American education system was doomsday. Okay, the report came out in 1983. I remember very clearly. I was in college as an undergraduate. And I remember this report coming out, and we all studied it, and we read it cover to cover. It's a short report. It's not very long. It's a very easy read. And it said that our expectations have gone to heck. We're not getting our students competitively They're not comparative internationally. Now, I am not, again, let's hold it up with an open hand. When we hold something with an open hand, we're not throwing it out the window, and we're not squeezing it too tightly. With every one of our beliefs and values and thoughts and our philosophies, we hold it with an open hand. That does not mean we're getting rid of it, and it doesn't mean we're holding on so tightly we can't look at it. So we had to hold up education in our hands and look at it. What is going right and what is going wrong? Where are we at risk and where are we not at risk? And it changed the way people started to think about American education and schooling. So that by 2001, and I've skipped a little bit of the decades here just for the sake of getting ourselves moving along, but in 2001 we had the No Child Left Behind Act. This was the act that said, we want American students to do better in terms of their academic scoring, and so we're going to increase standardized testing, and we're going to increase accountability measures. There had been very little of that prior to No Child Left Behind, which means that if you were in a well-to-do district in, let's say, Connecticut, and you were in a rural district in Maine, you might have very, very different expectations set for you. You might have very different curricular expectations. You might have very different standards. And so you might actually find very different things being taught and so on. So No Child Left Behind said, you now need to get yourselves in gear and you need to do better. Now that's fine to say that, and we need to do better on standardized tests. But there are a few things to remember. Number one, standardized testing is only one data point. And by the way, I'm not anti-standardized testing. I only say hold it up. Standardized testing is one data point in an entire existence of humanity, right? So a higher test score is all well and good, but if it creates in you a feeling that that's your worth, then it may have some issues with it, right? And so on. So as a data point, it can be useful. So that's number one to think about, is it's only one data point. The second thing to think about is that if I'm now telling, let's say that you're a school and you are a school and you are a school and you are a school. I have 4 schools. I make you all do a certain level. You have to pass to a certain level as a school, as an average within your schools. This school system fails. This one excels. This one does medium, and you all fail. My failing schools now are going to lose federal money. You did not meet my requirements and you did not meet my requirements. I'm taking money from you. Which are the schools that are most likely to fail? The ones that have no money. Is that what you just said? Right. The ones that are under-resourced are far more likely to fail. So the answer to an under-resourced is the answer to an under-resourced school to take their money. That's the fundamental flaw with No Child Left Behind. Now, here's what the government said. Okay, you're under-resourced and you need money, we get it. So here's what you need to do. There's plan A, plan B, and plan C, and if you meet one of these plans, we won't take your money. So now this school better get its acting gear, and there are several plans to do that. One's called a turnaround, where you basically get rid of all of your administration and some of your teachers and you put new people in. That's very drastic. Another one is you have within like 2 years to show that your test scores improve, so now you're just doing everything to get those test scores up. So there's different plans in place to do that, okay? So this is the way that our country functioned for a while, was through No Child Left Behind, which has now been put aside, okay? It has, because of the flaws that you all have already just pointed out within 10 seconds, okay? It punished schools based on scores without recognizing the other factors that create poor scores. Are these students less capable than these students? Probably not. Probably not. They're all people. They're all doing their thing. Okay? Are these students, there are 110 factors that can happen depending on your resources, okay? So when we look at standardized testing, saying, well, it's all equal, we all have the same test to take, what we know fundamentally is that one factor is mixed in with 1,000 other factors, okay? So we will see a change. That one will eventually go away. In 2015, we replace it with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which takes away that burden of losing financial support for poorer schools and so on. So it's I won't get into the details, but it basically took away No Child Left Behind so that we didn't end up with that pressure. So now schools are not under pressure to have to prove themselves under standardized testing. But one of the good things that came out of No Child Left Behind was that people did begin to realize that we need some uniform standards. Now, standards is not the same as curriculum. Standards means they're guideposts that we need to reach. So that was a very good thing that came out of it. Another good thing that came out of it was looking at data a little bit more carefully. Look at our data points, find out what they're saying. So if this school is still a failing school, okay, you're not going to be punished for that, but maybe you can sit down and analyze your data, and maybe you can figure out what might be happening, right? So there were a lot of good things to come out of a movement that moved the pendulum one way, and now we kind of got it back. But now we bring to the present time. Okay. Trump has decided to eliminate the Department of Education, okay? Basically, single-handedly, to abolish the Education Department federally. So all these federal laws that I've told you about that protect some subgroups, that provide funding, that provide food for children in schools, are at danger. I'm not saying they're gone right now. They are at danger of being gone. Now, what the federal government says is we're putting it back to the states. So the state of Maine can take care of itself. The state of Connecticut can take care of itself. The state of Hawaii can take care of itself. The state of California can take care of itself. How is that any different? Let's just change what we just did. You're now Maine, and you're now California, and you're now Hawaii, and you're now rural Arkansas. Do you see? Maine schools are fundamentally poor schools. They are under-resourced. They have kids that are hungry. Okay? Connecticut schools are very highly rated. Hawaii, top of the country. So when we throw it back to the states and say, states, you take care of it, we're right back to saying this school and this school and this school and this school. Okay, we will see where this goes. I do not know yet. I have a lot of worry on my mind about it, but I will also say in political fairness that we don't really know, that sometimes these things are meant to wake people up. Sometimes they're meant to say, what do we need and what don't we need? Sometimes it's meant to say, are there things we can cut that are not necessarily going to starve our children, right? Are there things we could do that would cut out some of the excess that we don't need? So what ends up happening is that when you have departments like an education department, it can sometimes be seen as top heavy, right? There's all these demands that come down. But it is a very direct swing from No Child Left Behind to let's get, this was full government involvement. This is no government involvement. So we've moved the pendulum from all the way over here to all the way over here, and maybe there's something in between that we might want to try to work for, okay? So just a thought. Just a thought. You know, I know you all aren't keeping your eyes on that news as much as I am. I keep my eyes on it every single day. I have my own students that are in education that say to me, what does this mean for me? And I say, I don't know, but let's just keep an eye on it. I don't know, okay? I also know that we have kids in our schools that are undocumented, meaning they don't have paperwork. Some of them are here as under asylum laws. Not here, in my own building, in the local system that I work in, where my kids went to school. We don't know what's going to happen with some of those kids. We don't know what's going to happen to food programs and so on. Now, the state of Maine is not going to let kids starve in schools. That I'm pretty sure about, okay? So there is something to say, okay, well, now the state may have to rearrange its own resources, but they're not going to let kids starve in schools. They simply are not, okay? I know this for sure. In fact, in Maine, the law says, and this is a Maine law, that all kids in every school gets free breakfast and lunch. You don't have to prove it. You don't need paperwork. You could be loaded in lots of food at home and you still get access to that program. Maine says, we're not going to tell you whether you can or can't eat our food here. Just eat, right? Okay. Everybody with me? All right. There's a lot of laws, a lot of stuff like that. I'm going to shift a little bit to, what do we have for time? We have till noon? Is that right? Okay. Yeah, okay, that's perfect. Okay, So perfect. So I want to talk about a few other key details in contemporary education, just so we can start to get a sense of comparatively, it's fun. I find it very interesting to think about comparison. I've spent a lot of time in India. I've gone in and out of many school systems that are amazing. I've seen some really phenomenal, very creative things at work. And I've also thought about that comparative nature. I teach a class on comparative education. Now, it's an odd thing to compare, let's say, just the US with just India. So I like to look at, and I have not listed it here, but there are United Nations kind of global goals, right? So when we talk about things like education for all, or we talk about the rights of the child, that's not a US or an Indian policy. Those are global policies that countries can sign on to. There's something called the rights for the child, right? Or rights of the children. And there are only 2 countries that didn't sign on to the rights of the children. This was back, I think, in the 1990s. One of those countries was like, don't misquote me on this, and I know I'm being taped, so I don't want to say this wrong, but one of them was like Ethiopia or something, and the other was the United States. Now, why would we not sign on? The argument was made that we're already doing all these things for the rights of the child, and to sign on to an international policy commits us to an international policy that we're not bound to. That was the way the argument goes as to why somebody might not sign on to a global policy. But the bigger point that I'm trying to make here is not about whether a country signs on or not. It's saying that when we talk comparatively, we're looking at a whole world. Okay, we're not just looking at whether India believes this or the US believes this. So when I talk about comparison points, also remember that I'm talking very generally in our public, or what you all call, again, government schools. So everything I've talked about has been government schools, or US, what we would call public education. Our class sizes are either, from K through 12, it runs, the lower grades tend to be very, very small, like you might have 10 or 15 in a class. This is for our government schools, all the way up through, even in the most poor areas, you'll never see a class size in elementary school that's going to go much beyond 20. Again, I am talking generally, all right? Please note, you could go to the US tomorrow, walk into a school system and say, oh, this is 22 kids. I think she told me something else. I'm telling you generally speaking, okay? By the time you get to high school, it would be it's unusual to have a class size that's more than 30, okay? My son teaches in a high school, and his class sizes run anywhere from 5 to 15 at a high school, okay? Now, colleges, that varies greatly. Colleges, depending on if you have a big lecture hall, my class sizes that I teach in my education classes, sorry, I'm touching the mic again, tend to run about, I don't have any classes that are bigger than 28. That's the largest I will ever have. My class sizes tend to run anywhere from 5 to 25. And those are about the size of my classes at the college level, okay? Now again, that depends. If you're in a large university, you can have 200 students in a lecture hall. So please know that at the college level or university level, that changes. Teacher preparation, I've already mentioned, well, briefly mentioned, you must have either a BA, a bachelor's degree, which is 4 years, and many teachers get a master's degree, which, as I said, is typically 1 to 3 years. You can get a master's in education in a year's time, which is actually what I did. You must have licensure to teach in a public school. You must. You're not allowed to teach in a public school without that licensure. That licensure includes a number of classes that you must have, including a methods class, which I also teach, which has to do with things like think, pair, share, and how do you create engagement, all the things we're doing this week. And then you must also take a class in special education law. Typically, you need classes in literacy, diversity, and your methods classes, okay? And you also need classes in things like assessment and so on. Okay, teacher pedagogy tends to be, and again, you can go into schools and find plenty of exceptions, but the idea is that we do believe very much in that progressive, constructivist education, which is student-centered, and it's focused on critical and creative thinking, meaning that American schools tend not to do much with rote memorization. So that's another reason why American students don't perform as well on standardized tests. A lot of those tests are recall information. American students don't tend to do a lot of that kind of recall. It's more about getting into groups and thinking about things, or writing. There's a lot of heavy writing, reflection, and that kind of critical engagement. Also, I mean critical in the sense of critical theory, which means that you do take those beliefs and theories and you examine them. Say what's right about them, what's wrong about them, where can we do better? Where do the power structures lie? So we talk a lot about that in my classes at the college level, but even at the elementary level, I talked with kids and said, who's represented in this room? What do we see in the book? So that's a critical lens there, okay? There is a great deal of diversity, and another reason that the US doesn't tend to score as well on exams globally is that our society is exceedingly diverse. It's tending to be more diverse than a lot of places in the world that score better, and that means that we are accommodating a great number of kids that don't speak English. In my local school system in Maine, just where I am in Lewiston, Maine, okay, right in that one little dot of the universe, okay, there are 30% of the kids that come from English, that are English language learners that come from a different multilingual background. So that's a third of the students in just little old local dot on the map in Maine. So those are kids that are coming into schools that don't speak English or that have very limited English proficiency, okay? We have a lot of diversity in terms of, yes, the disability, kids with disabilities are well integrated into classrooms across the domains. By the time they get into high school, they're less integrated. They tend to be a little bit more separated out depending on the disability. But our laws are very strong. You set up an independent plan. You can have dyslexia and make your way to Harvard or to top colleges. You can have blindness and make your way to top colleges. Disability should not be an obstacle in that path, because we have laws that give you a plan and that give you some protections. But we also have diversity of class, diversity of race, diversity of identity markers, diversity of LGBTQ students. And so we have a diversity that creates both a vibrancy, empathy, resilience, all of those things you've talked about, as well as the challenges, which is why it's easier to meet that diversity with smaller class sizes. If I have a class of 20, I have a better chance of meeting that diversity and knowing my students than I do if I have a class of 50, right? Okay. And then we do offer free breakfast and lunch programs, and this is just a typical picture of what a cafeteria kind of setup where food might be there. Okay, take a breath. We've covered a lot. I'm going to back up. I'm going to finish this slide, and then we'll see what we have time. I might do the video later. Again, just a reminder, we do have challenges as well. So on the last slide, I showed you some of the things that I think tend to be pretty positive about US education, public education, government education. We do have average test scores. We don't tend to perform as well as a lot of places. There is no testing required to graduate from high school, and often it's not needed to get into college. Now, I put this as a challenge only because many other countries and cultures require testing either to leave secondary and or to go on to college. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing or a good thing. I'm kind of don't know. I think it's a little bit of both. We hold it in an open hand. But I put it on the challenge because it is something where when we eliminate that, it means we don't necessarily have those data points, right? Those are data points. Like it or don't like it, right? We have a wide range of diversity, but it can create challenges, including this idea of who gets what for resources, where our monies go, and so on. There are great funding disparities between rich and poor areas and districts, and we do have formulas to try to balance that. I say we, both the federal government, state governments, and local governments all work to try to balance that, but there's just no way around the fact that better resourced areas tend to have better schools. And they also, by the way, if you're a teacher, so let's say that you're going into teaching, right? Now you have a choice. You can either work at this failing poor school, or you can work in Hawaii at this great school. Which one are you going to want to kind of choose? Now again, it might depend on your philosophy. Go, I'm going with this one right here. I just love this. I'm going to work right there. But your pay is going to be a whole lot better in the Hawaii school, and your quality of life is going to be a whole lot better at that school. And so we also are going to have teachers that have choice that are going to tend to work in the better schools, right? So where does that leave us? The other thing is you say, sure, I'll work in this school, but I'm only going to give it 2 years. I don't think I can do this school more than 2 years. I worked in Jersey City for 2 years. and I left. Do you know what that means for these kids in this school? They have a rotating set of people who abandon them over and over and over and over again. I'm so passionate about this, I can't tell you. When I left Jersey City, I felt that I was abandoned. They sit with me every day, and that was 40 years ago, okay? Why? Because they are in a cycle. Did I know that I was going to stay for 10 years in that school? I knew I was not. I gave it 2 years, and I loved those 2 years, but I couldn't stay. That group of kids get recycled, and what do you think they say? We're not worth it. Nobody stays, right? Kids absorb those messages, right? So it's something to think about. We have a lot of teacher shortages around the country now, and we don't pay our teachers well at all. It is not a high pay field. You go into it because you love it, not because you're going to get rich on it, I'll tell you that. And then student mental health, we've seen a big increase. School violence, and I don't just mean, and you all, there's a stereotype that everybody in America is walking around with guns in their pockets and shooting everybody, and we're not, and it's not, we're not, don't worry, that's not happening, okay? However, it does sometimes happen. But the other thing that happens is that we have more violence just even in terms of kids, gangs, fighting, threats, bullying, cyberbullying, okay? So by violence, I don't necessarily mean everybody's walking around ready to kill you. It just means that we have a situation where we are seeing a great escalation in school violence and in school and in mental health issues. I suspect that some of that is around the world. There's some post-COVID realities. We all were traumatized by that, okay? It's collective trauma. But we also have kids in our school systems that are coming from real traumas within their homes, as you all have here as well, right? So we're seeing a great increase in that. So those are some of the challenges, and that is where I'm going to leave us to think about pros and cons. Remember, we hold it with an open hand. I don't now say, well, that's it. It's all gone to heck in a handbasket. No, I don't do that. And I also don't say, oh, it's the best thing ever. I just hold it up and I say there's pros and cons. We live with the ambiguities. We live with those questions. We live with the uncertainties. We live with the paradoxes. To me, that's the space that's rich with learning. If I can live with a paradox, it means I can settle myself and I can ask the critical questions, okay? So I don't become paralyzed by it, and I also don't become complacent, right? I keep myself learning and moving forward, and I want all of my students to also settle into that place of ambiguity and paradox. It's okay to live there, all right? So we will, like I said, we have some activities that we're gonna come back around to that are gonna be more interactive and engaging. I have a little thing you'll do in groups. We do have another Kahoot, and we also, if we have time, we'll do the video was actually on Title I, which again is a title. It's really just it's a school system that did a video for parents in a low-income school to say, here's what we're doing for your students. And I just thought it was a very sweet video. It only is a few minutes, so we can come back around and look at that. So I think we're okay, all right? I think we can cut the video. Should we open up for questions or anything like that right now? A couple of minutes, a few minutes, and then we'll break. We're starting it at 12:30, right? Okay, so we're starting the next session at 12:30, but does anybody have any, how about 1 or 2 questions or thoughts if anybody has something to share? Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, and I know some people are still out and will probably be filtering back in, but we're going to start with the video that is about Title I, which is part of that, the support back from the 1960s, which was the law that started education. It was Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So it was ESEA was the name of the act. And the only reason, so a couple of things. One is when we do video, it also helps to wake us up a little bit. I like to throw in occasional videos for my students, maybe in the middle of a lesson. Here they are, come on back. So I like to put in the videos because I think it is another form of engagement. It's visual, and for some of us, we're visual learners. You don't really have to know a lot from this video. The point that I want to point out is this. Number one, this was very specifically from the 1965 ESEA law, which is important to note because Title I has been around for many, many years, okay? Title I was really helping poor school systems with funding and programming. And it also included funding to help teachers, to help educate teachers. So that was also part of it, but that was Title II. So we're doing Title I. Also, the reason I like this is it shows an inner city school, meaning an urban, low-funded urban school. It is two leaders of the school who are presenting the video, which I really like, and they are Black women who are talking about their program, so they have full ownership and belonging and identity within that school system, so I really liked that. I also really like that they show video clips from around their school, and so they are proud of their school. They are really happy to reach out to others about their school. So that's why I really thought this clip spoke to me. It's speaking to me on not just the information that's in it. Information that's in it I could just put on a bullet point, but I like the visual of the kids. And the other thing is they did this for the parents. So they're reaching out to the parents to say, do you know what we offer in this school? So I want you to see that. And you will see, to get to the question of the creative and the interactive and some of the pedagogies. So I also want you to note that. When we see this video, I want you to look at where are the kids engaged, how are they engaged, who do you see engaged, and so on. And some of this was obviously filmed during COVID because a lot of the kids are wearing masks for some of it, so we're all used to that. Let me see if there's anything else I want you to think about. I think really that's the key. The key takeaway here is to hold it open and look at all the dimensions in a critical and creative way. Does that make sense to people? It's short. It's just a short little video. Okay, we can go ahead. Oh, yeah, it's fine.
Hello, my name is Leslie Russell, and I am the Title I Program Administrator for Federal Programs with Chesapeake Public Schools.
And I am Sheree Brown, Title I Program Administrator for Instructional Programs with Chesapeake Public Schools.
We would like to first welcome back our returning Title I families and officially welcome our new Title I families to what's sure to be an amazing school year. We are here to share a few facts about how Title I funding supports our Title I schools and families. Title I is a federal program funded under the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1965 that supplements funding for local school districts to provide all children with a significant opportunity to receive a fair, equitable, and high-quality education and close the achievement gaps. Title I funding is allocated based on schools with high numbers of percentages of children from economically disadvantaged families. These funds directly impact student achievement by providing additional services that increase the amount and quality of instructional time, providing students with an enriched and accelerated academic program, significantly elevating the quality of instruction by offering professional development opportunities and training for administrators and teachers, and affording parents substantial and meaningful opportunities to participate in the education of their child.
The goals of Title I are to increase academic achievement, provide direct instructional support to students, provide professional development for teachers, and to promote parent education and involvement. All Title I schools in Chesapeake follow the school-wide instructional delivery model, meaning the instructional services provided are used to enhance the entire academic program. Schools adjust their instructional practices based on their assessment data. As a Title I parent, you have the right to be involved in your child's education. All Title I schools in Chesapeake must develop a written parent and family engagement policy that includes school stakeholder input and provide a copy of their school's quality profile issued by the Virginia Department of Education. These documents can be accessed on your school's website for your convenience. Here are a few additional ways you can partner with your school and remain engaged in your child's education. Attend Title I annual meetings and and family engagement programs to learn more about how Title I funds support the instructional programs at your child's school and ways to extend your child's learning at home. Participate and advocate for your child during parent conferences, and let your voice be heard by completing the Title I surveys. Your child's principal will share important information about their school quality report card. Please contact us at the Office of Federal Programs to learn more about Chesapeake Public Schools Title I program at 757-547-1183.
We look forward to working with you this school year and hope to see you at one of the family engagement events hosted by our Title I schools. All families can get involved regardless of your age or educational background. There is something for you.
Okay. So what did you see in that video? What are some things that occur to you? Anything. There's no wrong answer, by the way. When we do this, there's no wrong answer. What do you see in that video? Anything.
Parents' involvement.
Yes, parent involvement is very, very clear there. In low-funded schools and sometimes even in high-funded schools, some parents do not participate. It's not that they are bad parents, right? It's that they don't always know how to participate. And for some parents, school was a terrible experience for them. So it's really hard for them to walk into a school. And when you're talking about low income, you're talking about parents that may have had bad school experiences, and they may not have transportation, and they may have other kids at home. Notice how parent-friendly that was. That was specifically geared to engage and help parents feel accepted. In fact, they even said, all of you are welcome here, no matter what, right? So that was really a nice point. Yep. Yes. Yes. So what you saw in those video clips were a lot of the student-centered learnings happening. I mean, I just picked this because it was talking about Title I, and then it dawned on me how wonderful those examples were. Those kids were fully engaged in their learning, and the teacher was the facilitator. You saw teachers interacting. You saw them with the kids at all times, okay? And this is in a poor, probably crowded, probably challenging district. So when people say, well, I don't know if I can do that, yes, you can. If this school system can do that, you can do it. Notice all the ways those kids were engaged. Okay, what else did you notice? Any other things? So, yeah. Happy kids, thank you. When I look at videos of kids, the number one thing I look for is, are these kids experiencing joy? I am a big believer in joy these days, okay? It's been my mantra is, where do we find our joy? And if our kids' faces, if your faces are not reflecting joy, if you are not happy people, it's a lot harder to learn. So yes, thank you, exactly right. Those kids were happy kids, right? Are they happy all the time, every day? No, they had a video camera on them, whatever. That's fine. But we saw joy. They weren't just sitting there taking information in. They were feeling happy. They were patting dogs. They were going to a construction site. Those are happy children. Now, they were young children, but actually there were a couple of clips of older kids. I believe in joy in every level of learning all the time, and that's been my latest thing. I just think we really have to think about that. So thank you, nice one. I saw a hand up over here, I think. The pets.
Did it look like they were close to nature compared to
Yes, I thought so too, yeah. And I really don't know the context, so we don't know if they had a special day for that. We don't know if there was maybe a therapy animal there that day. We don't know whether somebody has a disability support animal. But I did also notice that there was a real connection. They also had those kids outside. Now, granted, we don't know. They may have just been filming special days, but the fact that they have those days, and those kids seemed very naturally involved in those days. So yeah, even in the middle of what's probably more of a city environment, they still were able to find ways to get those kids out. Even the construction one, right? Like I was really struck by that. We're in the city, where are we going to take our kids? What kid doesn't love a construction site, right? So, I mean, even that, and you can do math, and you can do writing, and you can do reading. You can do all sorts of things around construction. You can find children's books about construction, and if you can't find one, you can write one these days with AI, right? So you have no excuse, right, to not be engaging in these ways. Yeah, very nice examples. Anything else, anybody? Yeah.
The children were actually in clothes that were comfortable to them.
They were in clothes that were comfortable to them. Right, so one thing about American public education, the government schools, is we do not require uniforms. Now, there are pros and cons. Remember holding it up? There are some really good reasons to have uniforms, very good reasons. One is it's an equalizer, which is, it can be a socioeconomic equalizer. Another good reason is that you can mark who's a student and where your students are. But the other side of it is that kids are in comfortable clothing and they can wear what they want to wear, and there's a lot of freedom in that. And so there's a double side to those, but you are 100% right. So in public schools in the United States, we do not have any kind of uniform. There are sometimes dress codes. You're not allowed to wear clothing that promotes something dangerous. You're not allowed to wear clothing that reveals too much of, you know, body parts, things like that. But for the most part, they're pretty liberal, and they usually are just you can wear what you want to wear and feel comfortable with. Yeah. So that was a very interesting point that I hadn't thought about myself. Did you note some diversity among the students? So racial diversity, gender diversity. I don't know if we saw much for disability diversity there. That's what I thought too, maybe with the educators themselves, and I didn't know if the one with the dog was in a maybe in a chair, I don't know. But anyway, there was some diversity represented for sure. Yep, yep. And by the way, everything you've noted is not actually, the whole content was about Title I, right? So what's interesting, again, philosophy is there whether you know it is or whether you don't. Every single thing we just talked about is about what we believe about education, and fundamentally that was just a video to say, we're a Title I school, please come in. Well, the parents were certainly, it was intended to bring, but it was also to say, what is Title I? Title I is about providing supports for kids. It gives interventions for math and reading, and there's federal funding for that Title I, okay? So there's even just like some information there. Again, I could have bullet pointed that, but it would have left out all these other dimensions, right? So kind of interesting, isn't it, to think about how just one video conveys that. If I were to give you the assignment, which I'm not going to, but if I were to say to you, build a video about your, you know, education experiences, it makes you think, what might you include? What would you show? If I were to tell you, I want to have you all do a video that I bring back to my students, what might you show and what might you include, right? So we don't have time for that kind of an exercise, but if we had more time, it would be really fun to do that.